there are some of us that, the presence of that law, well, that's a boundary on behavior. You don't cross that. For others, it's more personal beliefs. I mean, I have an understanding of what the law says about firearms, but growing up, the most important thing was what my dad said in regard to firearms. And my dad didn't brook any foolishness. When you were out in that range, when you were in the woods, you're getting ready. If you didn't show proper respect for that weapon and the people around you when you've got that weapon, you didn't have the weapon. And it instilled a sense of personal responsibility. And I also think that that's missing for some, that there's too many folks that want all of the rights and privileges of gun ownership and possession, but don't want to take responsibility.
What is going on, everybody? 'Tis I, the enigma of the gun airwaves, Miyanovich, welcoming you to Season 3 of the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast, where unprecedented perspectives are packed into the cargo hold for the LGO Lens spaceship Voyagio.
That's fucking Italian.
Don't believe that evolution is possible with guns and public safety in America? It's already happening, y'all. Minds are evolving. Think guns versus public safety is the only game in town, do ya? Think culture war is the big boss, do ya? Then keep your ass in the past. Everyone else, all aboard! Hello, everybody. 'Tis Miyanovich again, and welcome back to another episode of the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast. And holy sweet mother of pearl, do we have a great guest for you today. Today, I am introducing you to new friend of LGO and humble titan of the professional threat assessment world, Dr. Gene Deisinger. If there is a small cadre of people who are the world's leading experts in the intervention science related to mass shootings, then Gene is in that cadre. Gene is the president of Deisinger Consulting, LLC. He is a retired deputy chief of police and director for threat management services at Virginia Tech. He has a PhD in counseling psychology. Gene was in charge of developing one of the earliest threat assessment systems in the country when he worked as the primary threat manager for Iowa State University from 1994 until 2009. He is the lead author of one of the seminal books on the subject called The Handbook for Campus Threat Assessment and Management Teams. Probably the most important thing that you need to know about Gene professionally is connected with one of the worst moments in the history of the United States. We all remember the Virginia Tech shooting in 2007, where 32 people were killed and 17 wounded. Up until the Mandalay Bay shooting in Las Vegas, the Virginia Tech shooting was the largest incident of targeted violence in our country's history. As a response to this incident, Virginia Tech recruited and hired Gene to come in and establish a system that would prevent such a horrendous event from ever happening again. This is the guy we are talking to today. The most important thing that you may need to know about Gene personally comes from a previous interview where he stated the following: "I can't think of a much more precious gift another person offers to me than trusting me enough to allow me to help them at a point when they need it the most." So please join me for my multiple-part conversation with Dr. Gene Deisinger. Gene Deisinger, welcome to the Liberal Gun Owners Lens podcast, man. It's great to have you here.
It is fantastic to be here. Thank you.
This year was a challenging year for our organization, but one of the the silver linings of it was I got a chance to go to the Virginia Threat Assessment Conference, just thinking that I was going to be able to spend time with John, and I ended up meeting a number of really great people and a number of titans in the world of threat assessment, and you are one of these people. And I'm so glad that I got a chance to meet you. And I'm so glad that you're here, and I'm so glad that you were open to relationship and talking and dialogue and all of that, because you're a humble guy, but I'm just going to say it. You're kind of an important guy in the history of threat assessment in the country. So I'm just happy. I'm happy that you're so open. So thanks for that, Gene.
Well, you're kind and gracious, Randy. Given that you were in the company of John already, who is truly one of the titans in the field, I felt lucky just to sit at the table with you all.
Well, he's made sure. I'm constantly shining his ass about how important he is, and so he made sure to let me know that he's kind of a demigod, but you're above him in the Titan area. That's what his feeling is. Look, I don't know if you know this or not. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Did you want to say something?
Well, that's awfully kind. I think most days I just feel like an armadillo beside the road.
So good. Yeah. How important to you is sense of humor? We're going to get into this later, but you are a psychologist. You've been a cop. You're a threat assessment professional. You deal with mass shootings. How important is keeping your own self stable, healthy, laughing? How important is that? Because that's something John and I talk about all the time, is this thing can grind you down. So what does Gene do for himself to take care of himself? And also, do you find your humor is important?
Oh man, humor is essential. Without it, I don't know how I'd keep going with this. This is my 31st year doing threat assessment and management as a key function of what I do for a living. And a sense of humor has been absolutely critical. I'll admit at times it flows into the gallows humor. And at least in the company of those that I know have walked similar paths in that, the company of those people that have been there, done that, understand the nature of the work, understand the nature of the challenges is a huge safety valve. And people like John, Dave Okada, Jeff Cuneo, a dear friend of mine, et cetera. Those sort of resources, and then frankly, without my family, I wouldn't still be doing this. Their gracious support and love, and I'm a quiet guy, more of an introvert, and so I like those crisp morning walks. And as I did this morning, it's just nice to get that fresh air, clear the head a little bit, step away from the desk, and then frankly, I think we might have talked about this a little bit at the bar that night. Is I love to cook, and so I try to shut things down in the later afternoon with work when I can, and when clients can wait a little bit, and just step away from the desk and get into the kitchen and pull stuff together. And for me, that's just, I can see an accomplishment. That's a big change from what sometimes the day to day is. And I just love the creativity of it. And so that with a good wine and a good whiskey, and if there's good company involved, all the better.
Yeah,
So,
your vibe is not something that it's rare, at least in my experience so far. You're very kind and kind of peaceful person, yet you deal in this atrocious fucking thing, and it's very nice to come across. I'm not saying that John isn't, but John's a little wild, right? So it's really nice to come across. And the other reason why I brought up the question about humor is, I talked about it with Dr. Stephanie Leida, who I had on a couple weeks ago. Stephanie, who I also met there, is a wonderful person.
yeah.
Also said the exact same thing. Like, it goes to dark humor, it goes to gallows humor. It's almost like it has to give you some sort of a relief valve. All of this wonderful, nice stuff to actually bring up that while we were at VTAC having those conversations, I brought this up with Stephanie. John and I are having a running joke about how awesome the middle urinal was at the bar. It was the best urinal. That was way better than the other two. And so we're leaving back and forth from the table. We're fucking sending each other text, like screenshots of the urinal. We're talking about threat assessment and people dying.
Hopefully just the urinal, Randy.
Well, it was. Listen, I didn't want to cross any lines. I felt that was. Right. I'm sure somebody caught me in the bathroom doing it, and they were like, "What the hell's wrong with this guy?" But we were talking about, mass death, and then John and I are texting about how awesome the urinal is. Have to do it. Like, I'm not where you guys are, but I do deal with looking at the worst of what happens with guns in society. And so this seems to be, I'm sure you can attest to this, a marathon, not a sprint. This is mitigating an unprecedented thing. I don't know how we do what we do, whether it's me facing things or you facing things. without having some kind of sense of humor or something like that. So
Agreed.
I just wanted to bring up humor a little bit. We are a gun organization, and you do have a history with guns a little bit that I wanted to talk about. But can you remind me of where you were born again? What the state that you were born in?
I was born in Maine, but I was raised in Wisconsin.
That was it. That's what I recall from our conversation. Now, you did bring up that you have been involved in competition shooting in the past, but were you brought up with hunting and so on and so forth? And
Very much.
yeah.
Yeah, in our family, that was we grew up not terribly well off, and so back at that time, it was actually an affordable way to put some extra meat in the freezer. And frankly, it was just a fantastic opportunity to have a different type of time with my dad, whom I love dearly. Well, he's passed now, but he could be a hard man to live with some days. But out in the woods, it brought out the best in him. And so having that experience with him, with hunting and with preparing and sighting in the new rifles or whatever it was, absolutely, those are cherished memories.
That's something that it's a very similar story to our co-founder Adam Sorum, who is from the northern Minnesota, and he's in East Grand Forks now. His family was in a similar situation. They weren't exactly super awesome and well off, and getting meat every season was a part of how they kind of closed the loop for themselves with food. That's not something that most Americans, particularly most liberals, would be able to relate to. But it's kind of an important testimony. This kind of stuff actually, maybe it doesn't happen as much now. I don't know. Maybe it does. But certainly in our time, your time, and Adam's time, people actually still do that. They still get meat, and it helps their family to eat.
Yeah, I think it's less of a economically viable approach than what it was when I was a boy and a young man. I think now it's pretty costly with the licenses and all that. You could probably buy a quarter of beef for the cost of it, but at the time it was an important way with venison, squirrel, rabbit, etc. To add a little bit more to the larder. And again, that time out in the woods, which was even growing up in a rural area of Wisconsin, getting out to the woods was great. And even in November during the primary rifle season in Wisconsin. But yeah.
When you were young and you guys were hunting, did you practice much, or was it basically like the rifles sat in the cabinet or whatever until season, and then you busted them out, broke off, got the rust off, shot a little bit, and then went hunting?
More the latter for the most part. We did a little bit of general target shooting, but most of it is, the main rifle season in Wisconsin is around Thanksgiving time. And so if we hadn't done it before, by October, we're going over to the Sportsman's Club and making sure that the weapons are zeroed in, that we're refamiliarized with them, and have everything that we need in terms of safety equipment and ammunition for the hunt. Yeah. Not that we needed a lot, but
right. Yeah, it's very common for hunters even now. I think there are many hunters that aren't necessarily doing competition shooting, or maybe they're not into self-defense, or they're not at the range all the time. They love hunting, and the guns are there for hunting, and every year they dust them off and get it all set up and do their hunting, and then the guns go back in. Very normal. So how did eventually? I don't remember the timeline, but eventually you got into competition shooting a little bit. What was that path like?
For a little bit, I was part of an Explorer program in late high school and college, and with the Wisconsin State Police, and had an opportunity to get familiar with the duty sidearms that they use, which back at the time was revolvers, and then do some competitive shooting with other Explorer posts, primarily, sometimes against the troopers too. And so it was just a few years that I had opportunity to do that, but it was great to refine that skill set, to find I was pretty talented with it. And there was just a sense of mastery, and then just also the fellowship, the training and guidance from the troopers who were advisors to the Explorer program, with peers who were interested in it, was a great time of development for me.
Yeah, and you still have firearms to this day, like in the safe at home or whatever I think you mentioned?
I do.
And do you get a chance to use them at all? Or are you still doing some hunting, or do you go out to the range occasionally?
No, I really don't much anymore. I I've been retired from law enforcement the last few years, and the first couple of years after I retired, I regularly qualified with handgun,
Yeah.
part of the concealed carry, and then frankly, those years of carrying a sidearm did a number on my hip, and I was no longer as invested in regularly carrying a sidearm. And so it still comes out once in a while for some occasional practice, but um, anymore it's there for home defense. And frankly, one of them was my duty weapon when I was a sworn officer, and so it has some sentimental value for the years
Yeah.
of service.
What's the hip thing? Because you had weight on that one side, it just pulled down on your hip girdle, and that caused an issue?
That was part of it. We had also switched some different holsters with the last duty weapon I carried was a Glock, and with the rail system on the Glock, you can add a bunch of different attachments, and we added the flashlights, which were great in terms of clearing buildings with, and so the rail mounted light on it, but it meant it added about an inch to the bottom. But we had to switch holsters. And so those new holsters, I couldn't get the cant at the right, well, to have the cant at a decent angle for drawing the weapon in a timely basis. It just cocked my hip just a little bit if I was sitting in an office chair
Yeah.
with my uniform duty rig. In plain clothes, it wasn't a problem.
Yeah.
But with my uniform duty rig, whether in the car or sitting in the chair, it just kind of cocked my hip a little bit. So it got pretty painful the last couple of years.
Has it gotten better since you haven't had to carry?
It did, although it realistically took a couple of years after I retired before it didn't constantly ache.
That's interesting. I never would have thought of that in
Yeah.
a million years.
Yeah.
I wonder if that happens. Do you have other buddies that are cops or were cops that stuff happens with?
Yeah, it's not just the weapon. It's frankly all the other crap that you carry on a duty rig. And so, yeah, and back when I was in it, was mostly on the belt. And now it's, in fact, I was just doing training the other day and was observing how many of the officers are using external ballistic carriers, and that so much of the weight that used to be just on my hips is now spread around the load bearing vest or the ballistic holder. And so that's got to be a lot better for them than carrying all that weight.
Yeah, a lot of people don't realize what kind of a burden that can be, even if you're on a gun range all the time. Like ergonomics and the body balance and all that stuff really matters. It's not something that people think about. So you mentioned that you're a police officer. This is a good segue because we'll run through this sequence really quick. So you ended up working on a PhD in psychology at Ohio University. That's where I went. Iowa State University. You went from a PhD student to a PhD student who was hired to work in the student counseling services. Then you were promoted to assistant director of those services. Then you joined the ISU police department as a civilian. Then you went to the law enforcement academy and became a police officer. All of that. Is that correct?
You're stalking me, Randy. Yeah, that's a pretty good recounting of at least that portion of my career trajectory.
Yeah. So what the hell happened there? That's like, what kind of an arc is that? Like, who does that? Like, how did you go from I'm going to get my PhD in psychology to now I'm a cop? Like, it makes sense to me after I look at it, but what was that process like? Did you see it all as like the same river and the stream of Gene Deisinger just trying to?
No, not it. I mean, that wasn't where I was heading when I was in my doctoral program and when I started practicing. But when I became the clinical director about the same time I became the clinical director at the counseling center on campus, I had started a part-time private practice in the community, mostly working with law enforcement and other emergency services, pre-employment evaluations, primarily, but also some post-incident trauma response, some general counseling services for emergency services folks, and then a little bit more into the operational psychology, supporting hostage negotiation teams, et cetera, crisis intervention, co-responding with officers out in the field. So I had that connection to law enforcement before I became sworn. And I was the liaison between the student counseling service and the University Police Department and the City Police Department in Ames, Iowa. And so, and that was about the time back in 1993 that we developed the threat assessment process, which was actually the idea of our police chief at the university at the time, not my idea. I was just the one that was tasked with building it out, under the wrong assumption that I, as a psychologist, knew more about violence than others that were part of the development team, which I didn't, and most psychologists don't, in fact. But I learned a lot. And anyway, there came a point we made a bad decision in kind of operating the threat management process, with me leading it out of the counseling center, and that just raised some potential conflicts of interest. And so the chief asked if I would move over to the police department as a civilian and continue in the leadership of it. And struggled with that decision for a little bit, but I just so enjoyed working with him. And he was just, frankly, more progressive than what some other leaders in student affairs were in terms of responding to people in crisis on campus. And I thought, well, why not? This would be something different. And I think I was on the job about a month when he called me into his office on a Friday afternoon. He said, I've got a spot for you at the State Police Academy. You start in 6 weeks. You probably ought to get in shape. And I'm like, what? No, time out. This was not part of the deal of coming over here. And he's, no, trust me on this. This will be good. And he was right. I mean, one, it was great training for me. I did get into better shape back then, which was good for me. I initially I thought, well, I'm going to police. I don't know anything about this crap, and then realized a lot of law enforcement was applied psychology. And so that made a lot of sense to me. And while I had worked with law enforcement and had gained the trust and I think respect of many in the jurisdictions that I worked with, having that sworn capacity and working in the sworn capacity with investigations, initially, and then some patrol, but mostly with investigations, was great to get a more of a firsthand understanding from a law enforcement perspective about those dynamics, about risk and violence, and where the criminal justice system can help us with these issues and what its limitations are. And frankly, it validated a perception I had that we weren't going to hospitalize or arrest our way out of the issues. And so that was, I think it actually helped us broaden out our approach to threat assessment and management.
Yeah, it puts you at street level. You did say that most psychologists aren't superior in their knowledge necessarily of violence. I would see that as kind of a typical dynamic with people who are on the outside of something, kind of looking in. Not that psychologists and psychiatrists don't deal with violent people. They do, but they're kind of on the outside of it. And I see this a lot with dealing with scientists and academics and intellectuals, is that while I think it's valuable, the work is valuable, there's definitely you can definitely taste in their understanding and their expertise that they're kind of on the outside of it. You becoming a cop throws you dead center in the river of it. And so, because you don't, I mean, when I look at you or I talk to you, the first thing is not like this guy was a cop or this guy's a cop. It's like the last, but it's like a perfect combination for you to get your psychologist expertise inside of the shit. You're like you're going into it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it was good. And then, with Iowa being such a rural state, I was probably the only full-time operational police psychologist or law enforcement psychologist in the state. One of my classmates from grad school did it part-time, mostly on the pre-employment and the trauma response side, rather than on the operational side. And so that meant I worked with local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies, everything from stalking to counterterrorism. So it broadly advanced my training, understanding, appreciation of the kind of the whole range of violence.
Yeah. Can we take an aside for a second? Because the liberal gun owners looks at gun-related negatives in 8 different categories. And one of them, those categories, is police misconduct shootings. and I've talked to some people in the past about how important taking pressure off of the police is in terms of responding. So you mentioned co-responder, like a co-responder role. That seems to me to be early. Like I thought co-responder programs or situations were only kind of in the last 5 to 10-ish years. Most people that I've talked to, every police department that has a co-responder program loves it and wish they did it earlier. What was your experience with that, being a psychologist who went out and responded with police to situations?
Really beginning back in the late 80s, early 90s is when we started that. And it was eye-opening. I mean, some things in terms of manifestation of mental illness or severe emotional distress, even if it's not at diagnostic levels, looks real different when it's raw and it's in real time than when it's, weeks later in a therapeutic setting, in a clinical setting. And so, again, it gave me a very differing appreciation for what law enforcement was having to deal with, the decisions that they were being tasked to make, often with very little training, very little support. But it's until fairly recently, it was the case that in most communities in the United States, if you were in crisis, the only people available to you after general business hours was law enforcement, whether they wanted to be or not, whether they were prepared for it or not. There weren't viable options in a lot of communities. And so for me, it has been energizing to see the growth of even predating the current surge of co-responder programs, the crisis intervention officer training that, we started the crisis intervention officer training in 1995 for every sworn law enforcement. Well, it was available to every sworn law enforcement officer in Story County, Iowa. That was an initiative of the sheriff at the time. And that was also the time when I was co-responding with both the university police, the city police, and to a lesser degree, the sheriff's office. So it was eye-opening. It was, responding down to the hospital when I remember vividly one county sheriff's office calling one time with an individual that report that they were actively suicidal and got out to the farm and literally cut him down from hanging in the barn and had rope impressions around his neck. And the hospital wasn't going to hold the guy because after the 4 hours of the deputy sitting in the emergency room with him, calming him down, they didn't see a distressed individual. And the deputy calling me from the hospital, I'm like, Doc, any chance you could come down here? I don't know if you can get a different outcome in this than I have, but this guy's literally still got the rope impressions around his neck and they're not going to hold him. And he's told me flat out, he's calm now, yes, but he's told me flat out, as soon as he goes home, he's going to finish what he started. So it's, so my point in that is seeing the challenge points in the mental health system. But it was eye-opening.
Yeah. Whatever somebody's political opinion is, that's one thing. There's where the rubber meets the road. There's the grindstone.
Yeah.
And what's real, right? Humans generate a lot of problems around the clock. They generate a lot of problems. And you're right. We often send the police after those problems, probably too much. And I don't care how much training a police officer has. They're just not going to be able to have as much nuance as somebody who specializes in dealing with certain things that happen inside of human behavior or the human mind. Some officers are, they're helping to give birth to a baby in the back of a car. They're chasing bad guys. To me, the co-responder reality seems like a no-brainer. Like a standard. It should be a standard for every police department. That's actually something I want to talk to you about in the future to hear more from you on, whether it's email or whatever. But if we're talking about better outcomes with law enforcement, the nexus between law enforcement and the public, I just think that needs to be a standard. Co-responder.
I think so. And in a lot of communities, the resources aren't currently there the way that we're prioritizing those. I've assisted in communities where there's a desire to do that, but simply not the funding and the staffing to make it realistic.
Yeah. And this is part of the challenge of we have ideas, but we also have reality and what's real. What can we do? What can we not do? We sort of have to triage as a society. These are the things we can do. Maybe we can't do these things till later. And that's sort of unfortunate. You and I share a fascination with human behavior. So I had one, and then I read that you have one. You obviously have one kind of by your career. I just think obviously all of human behavior comes from inside of the human mind. And so everything we see out in reality is the direct result of that. What sparked the fire in you to get so interested in, like, what happened with you where you were like, holy shit, human behavior is fascinating. Like, what happened?
Well, it actually, I think credit goes to Dr. Dan Kortenkamp, my introductory psychology professor in my undergraduate program when I was still an engineering major. And this was just an elective. One of the electives I chose to take. And Dan was this wonderfully energetic, probably one too many bad trips in the 60s and 70s, but a remarkably gracious person. And it was just infectious, his fascination and the energy that he conveyed about understanding the human experience and our behavior, our thought processes, our emotions, etc. And man, by the end of that semester, I'm like, I want to know more. And I wasn't convinced yet I wanted to be a psychologist because I'm a give me the facts, numbers guy, and particularly at that time. And but there was also something about engineering and then later computer science. It just wasn't quite clicking. But it was a couple of courses later that I caught the bug. But really, it was because of Dan.
Yeah, one guy kind of opened the door for you.
Yeah, with probably 150 of us in that lecture hall, and I say me walking in the door, just planning to probably get an easy A out of it, because how hard can this crap be compared to engineering, right?
Yeah. It doesn't. Again, it sort of fits in the Gene Deisinger, like they broke the mold. Like you're Renaissance kind of guy. You're very different. You have some contradictions going on. So you end up a cop, but you're heavily impacted by a gigantic hippie. Like that sounds
well, I
like
wasn't a cop yet then.
Yeah, but you end up a cop, but also a guy that really impacts you is a mega hippie. Probably burned himself out with LSD. This is fascinating. You're a fascinating guy, Gene. This is cool.
I've been lucky to cross paths with some amazing folks.
So here's one thing we're dealing with this year, liberal gun owners. I'm dealing with this year in research and writing. There's this nexus point between the law and human behavior. Mm-hmm. I don't think that our society is very good at it. I don't think that the people who are involved in law, who are supposed to be experts, are operating on the best assumptions or the best science. I think we are woefully behind in terms of from a lawmaking or policymaking stance to implementation to enforcement to the courts. I think we're basing everything on assumptions that were made a couple hundred years ago about how humans operate. And I think this is part of the problem. So do laws do things? Do they shape human behavior? Yes. Do they deter? Yes, context dependent. Do they prevent? Not often. Yeah, occasionally, maybe. So we have that. I believe that's the actual reality. Do laws do things to shape human behavior? Yes, but it's context dependent. But we have a political mechanism, social mechanisms that advertise the opposite. Like policy is a panacea. Laws are a panacea. If you just have the idea and you just make people do it, everything goes away and stops. What is your opinion about that gap between what law actually does and what it's advertised to do? Do you see that gap?
Sure, I see that gap. I mean, anybody alive today in the United States, and particularly if those of us that are blessed to go to different parts of the world and see a very different experience with firearms or regarding firearms, it would be hard not to notice that gap. I think, like so many things about we Americans, we're looking for the one answer to complex and nuanced issues and behaviors and circumstances. And to me, it's unrealistic to expect that any one approach is going to be sufficient and influence other people, all other people, rather. There are some of us that, the presence of that law, well, that's a boundary on behavior. You don't cross that. For others, it's more personal beliefs. I mean, I have an understanding of what the law says about firearms, but growing up, the most important thing was what my dad said went in regard to firearms. And my dad didn't brook any foolishness. When you were out in that range, when you were in the woods, you're getting ready. If you didn't show proper respect for that weapon and the people around you when you've got that weapon, you didn't have the weapon. And it instilled a sense of personal responsibility. And I also think that that's missing for some, that there's too many folks that want all of the rights and privileges of gun ownership and possession, but don't want to take responsibility for what that involves. And to be candid, I have a really hard time with that because it just wasn't how I was raised. It wasn't how I raised my boys either. To me, those things need to go hand in hand.
Yeah.
And so I'm just using that as a couple of examples. So sure, I know what the law is and what I can do with open carry and whatever, but I also know what's okay with me and what was okay in the environment that I raised with how you handled that weapon, how it was secured when it wasn't in use.
Yeah.
And, we've seen a shocking rate of gun suicides with youth. I mean, suicides in general have continued to go up over the last 25 years, but gun-related suicides with youth it's a little bit lower this last year, but it's still in the 2020s, the highest is what it's been, at least from the data that I'm aware of. And so much of that is an unsecured or improperly secured handgun that not just a teen, but a child has access to. And that dumbfounds me.
Yeah, I'm dumbfounded by that from gun owners as well, especially the ones that make 2A holy ground, sacred ground. But then their determination is they take that holiness or they take that powerful thing, that really important thing, and they immediately use it in akin with like a 17-year-old's version of what liberty means. Like, fuck you, I'm just going to do whatever I want. It's my right. You can't tell me what to do. Let's blow up this refrigerator with tannerite. Like, dumb adolescent shit is supposed to be what freedom means, right? So on that side, yeah, there are too many gun owners people that own guns that let their guns be loose, for sure. The other reason why I wanted to ask you about, does law have deterrent behavior? Does it really have preventative behavior? Is because we're dealing with mass shootings. And that is not a problem that we can necessarily throw laws at. Laws, I think, can help in our equation, right? Whether that's gun-related laws or other laws. But this is a phenomenon that you can throw laws at it all day, and it's not going to stop it. So in light of that, we're talking about behavior, right? So how do we influence? I mean, the answer is probably going to be threat assessment, but how do we start to understand and become aware of the real realities of human behavior? Because people want this whole thing to be about, if I say to somebody, I don't think gun control is how we're going to get to the head of mass shootings. We can have opinions on what the gun laws should be or whatever, but treating gun control as the number one way, I would never choose that based upon what I know now. I would choose behavioral intervention. And then if somebody wants to go after the AR-15 and ban it, fine, go ahead. But we should be doing something that prioritizes behavioral intervention, but we kind of don't. And it's frustrating to me. So what would your opinion be on that?
Well, we have seen changes in the collective behavior with different sets of laws. Some of the limitations on automatic weapons, for example, there was a decrease in mass shootings during that time, and there was a surge of an increase when that law was not renewed. So. Does that affect everybody's behavior? No, but that's a naive belief to expect that it would. But that doesn't mean it's not helpful in the overall equation. But it's not going to eliminate the problem, and I agree fully with you on that. I think we want these broad generalizations, and I don't comprehend of why someone needs an AR platform weapon. I see no need or value. I got friends that disagree with me on that, and so be it. But frankly, I'm not worried about them because they show proper respect for the weapon, the security of it, and how they're using it. I'm not worried. And so when I hear politicians grandstanding about all people with ARs or all people with, it doesn't matter what the particular weapon or weapons type is, we're not going to get through that because it doesn't apply to the majority of people.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't describe the experience of the majority of people, and then I think they get defensive. I would if all you people with guns. It's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
I mean, I hear this when training and threat assessment to people who are not experienced or familiar with firearms. I mean, they just hear that a subject has a firearm, and they're automatically dangerous. Like, well, let's look at the behavior.
Yeah.
Here.
I mean, I guess my question would be whether it's through the legal reality or cultural pressure or both, because essentially it's both. There's some other way of getting out to meet the behavioral reality that's behind mass shootings, right? And in my opinion, the best way to do that is through threat assessment or behavioral threat assessment systems, particularly in the school environment, if that's the one area that we're looking at. And that's a different approach, right? It's a different idea, because I think in order to have it, you have to have a nuanced understanding of how things are going to go. You have to have a contextual understanding of how things are going to go, as opposed to, as you said, like a single agent explanation for something that's complex. So this year with the law and the behavior thing, I'm just trying to introduce to people, whether it's in the gun community or outside of the gun community, that whatever it is that we have in society, we can't assume that if we stack laws up against something, that it's going to prevent or deter.
Not by itself and not with every incident. Will it help some? I strongly believe it will, because it has at points in our past. But also, I just don't think we are, not just our politicians, but we elect the politicians, have got the will to write the laws that are focused enough and strong enough to address. So let's take red flag laws. In many jurisdictions, if you are able to articulate and say, whether you're law enforcement or family or whatever, that Gene is going through a profound experience of stress, whether it's mental illness or not, and is a danger to himself or others. In more and more jurisdictions, you can get a red flag order. Well, like here in Virginia, that order essentially says, Gene, turn in all your guns. Well, if some irrational thought is part of the process, and it isn't always, but sometimes it is, we're going to leave it to Gene to trust, to turn over the weapons that we don't think he is safe to make decisions about the application. But we can only go after them if we've got proof that he didn't turn, or probable cause that he didn't turn them in, rather than, isn't that kind of late in the process? Yeah. If he really does intend malicious act. So to me, things like that are well-intentioned. It's a starting point. I'm glad we've got that as a step. Responsible gun owners are going through hard times. I've dealt with some of them who have handed me their weapons and say, here, can you secure these in the police department, back when we used to do that more. We did that at Iowa State, in part because there was a lot of students that were hunters. And so we had weapons lockers for it. But we'd have other people who are, whether they're just going through mental health crises or were subject to threat assessment, that we would either invite or they would ask to have their weapons secure, because they knew they were at risk of making poor choices that could harm themselves or others.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, and we want to support that.